Hello everyone and welcome to my The Bold and Beautiful Always channel. Eric informs Ridge after finding out that Brooke and Nick are getting married. 3 shocking revelations were made. Ridge Forrester felt covered in ice as the sun of Los Angeles pounded down on the well-kept expanse of the Forrester estate terrace. The bright bougainvillea spilling over neighboring trellises contrasted sharply with his slouched position in a wicker chair, the rich cushion providing no comfort. Although Taylor's admission of Steffi's paternity had been made weeks before, the wound was still fresh, a huge hole where assurance had previously been. It seemed as though the near drowning, the extraordinary effort to save Brooke, and the physical exhaustion that followed, which had almost killed him, were all precursors to this more profound and pernicious deterioration. His famed love for design was muted, his interactions with Steffi were tinged with a tragic reluctance that he couldn't completely conceal, and there was a continual, agonizing question mark floating between them. He was a ghost haunting his own life, navigating through meetings at Forrester Creations with mechanical precision. His identity seemed irrevocably broken, whether it was as a parent, Brooke's fate, or even as the fearsome Ridge Forrester. Unaware of the little trembling in his palm as he raised a glass of water, the only visible indication of the internal whirlpool, he gazed into the middle distance. That's how Eric Forrester discovered him. The patriarch's movements were unusually heavy, his usual vivacious vitality replaced by a deep fatigue that was inscribed in the creases surrounding his eyes. Since he first heard the news, he had been carrying a burden, a secret that seemed to practically weigh him down. Even though he had argued, begged, and even yelled, the choice had already been made, and the invitations had probably already been printed. The knife of what he had to deliver was twisted by the sight of Ridge, who was already clearly broken. The crunch of gravel beneath Eric's shined loafers was strangely loud in the tense calm as he approached cautiously. He paused a short distance away and looked at his son, taking in the pallor behind the tan, the hollows beneath his eyes, and the way his broad shoulders appeared to sag under some unseen burden. Eric was terribly hurt by the sight. Ridge had always been his pillar of support, his fiercest protector, and his most brilliant, yet complex, legacy. It was nearly intolerable to watch him reduced to this shell. Eric said, "Ridge," in a voice that was oddly heavy and devoid of its typical dominating warmth. The sound was sharp in the silence as he cleared his throat. "Dude. We must speak." His eyes were filled with a sorrow so intense it was almost terrifying. Ridge hadn't seen that expression since the darkest days following Stephanie's death or Beth's purported death. With apparent effort, Ridge carefully turned his head and fixed his eyes on his father. The intensity of the pain in Eric's eyes pierced the numbness with a new shock of icy fear. He had witnessed Eric's anxiety, anger, and disappointment, but this was different. This was sorrow. Ridge felt a sharp, chilly premonition stab him in the back. "What is it?" he said in a gravelly, low voice that had been worn raw by too many unspoken screams and unshed tears. Knowing instinctively that whatever happened next would be disastrous, he prepared himself. Did Steffi do it? Was she informed by Taylor? Had she taken a big step? Did Thomas do it? Another emergency? His wounded lungs tightened in his chest, making every breath seem like a struggle as his mind whirled through the worst-case scenarios. "Just say it, Dad." Eric averted his gaze for a second, his jaw clenched as he considered the magnitude of the treachery he was about to expose. He had seen all of Ridge and Brooke's epic, tormented story, the highs and lows, the betrayals, the reunions, and the unwavering, almost legendary faith in their destiny. For her, he had witnessed Ridge stumbling back from the edge of death. Every time he gazed at Brooke Logan, he had witnessed the unadulterated love in his son's eyes, even whether it was tinged with rage or hopelessness. It was like giving poison to give this news. Knowing that there was no softening of the hit, he took a trembling breath and steeled himself. He once more looked into Ridge's tired, frightened eyes, which were filled with sorrow that was even worse than rage. He provided no background. He didn't use clichés to soften it. In 3 short, devastating sentences, he conveyed the fundamental destruction, the vicious, life-altering headline. She chose Nick. The harsh and bleak words lingered in the sun-drenched air. 3 words. 10 letters. A sentence as succinct and definitive as the descent of a guillotine. The silence lasted for a heartbeat, perhaps 2. Ridge remained still. Didn't blinked. Didn't take a breath. The world stopped existing, it didn't tilt. The garden's brilliant hues faded to a stark, pointless white. A high-pitched, deafening whine replaced the soft hum of the city outside the estate walls. With a scream that seemed as if it were from another dimension, the glass in his palm slipped and broke on the flagstone patio, sending shards flying across the stone like pieces of his own mind. Eric's remarks weren't just heard, they exploded inside of him like a nuclear bomb, vaporizing all the residual support that kept him standing. Brooke. Brooke, his name. Her name was a byword for his breath, his struggles, and his very existence. With her name on his lips, he collapsed into smothering darkness, pushing his body to its breaking point for the woman he had fought death for. As the ocean attempted to take them both, the woman's safety had been the only thing on everyone's mind. Decided. Actively. Firmly. Not manipulated, not tripped back into, not succumbed to the circumstances. Decided. A verb that suggests action, thought, and a deliberate turn away from him. From all of their existence. From him. Nick. Nick Marone. The intruder. The con artist. Ridge's spirit was bitterly wounded by the man's past with Brooke. The man Brooke had gotten pregnant with while married to Ridge, the man she had previously turned to in their worst moments. It was the man who stood for treachery, opportunism, and the very opposite of what Ridge thought their destiny was. The man whose name itself tasted like poison and ash. With the power of a tidal wave, the implications hit Ridge, each one bringing with it a new round of pain. Brooke was getting married to Nick. Not in a relationship. Not making amends. Getting married. Promises. Dedication. Forever. Alongside Nick. She was acting immediately. After he had almost lost his life rescuing her. Following the common trauma that ought to have brought them back together. He had been clinging to the notion that she was his last surviving anchor while he drowned in the wake of Taylor's deception. Nick had been her first choice. Indefinitely. This wasn't a brief break, a misunderstanding, or a separation. This was a definitive, unchangeable statement. Nick had prevailed. There was no destiny left. The physical response was instantaneous and frightening. Ridge's lungs lost their air. There was a sudden, terrible emptiness instead of the ocean's desperate battle. He locked his chest. He felt his diaphragm twitch. With a ragged, frantic gasp, he attempted to inhale, but nothing came. The dazzling brightness in his vision tunneled forcefully, and at the edges it collapsed into swirling, creeping blackness. He heard his name being yelled by Eric, but it sounded like it was miles away. He was shaken by his father's hands on his shoulders, but the feeling was faint and imaginary. The storm raged with apocalyptic ferocity inside his mind. Flashing, jumbled, and vicious images. Bathed in sunlight, Brooke turned to face Nick and laughed. Nick's arrogant, victorious expression towering above him. At an altar, Brooke, wearing a white dress, is approaching Nick. While she was already making plans for her future with another man, he had fought for her, and the cold blackness of the Pacific water was closing over him. Steffi's betrayed, perplexed face. Has another daughter been lost? One more lie? Was Brooke aware of Steffi? Was this the pinnacle of her retaliation? The betrayal seemed biological as well as emotional. A rejection so deep that it set off a survival instinct. Still weak from the physical stress of the drowning and the constant mental abuse that followed, his overworked heart started to beat wildly, a frenetic, irregular beating on his ribs that felt like it might break his sternum. Despite the heat in Los Angeles, cold sweat quickly soaked through his shirt and steamed across his skin. Sharp, acidic nausea slithered up his neck. His muscles trembled fiercely, beyond his control, and he doubled over, his body tormented by dry heaves. The meticulously crafted facade of recuperation, the delicate shell he had been maintaining since leaving the hospital, came crashing down, exposing the bare, ruined rubble underneath. Ridge! Go, Ridge! Son, take a breath. Take a look at me. Now, Eric was kneeling next to him, his own pain being stripped away by panic. He had anticipated shouting, hatred, and fury, not this horrifying, quiet breakdown. He had witnessed Ridge deal with violent threats, corporate takeovers, and heartbreaking personal losses, but he had never seen him appear to be utterly destroyed. Completely and essentially broken. The physical symptoms, which included strong tremors, ashen pallor, and difficulty breathing, were concerning. Eric's hands were shaking almost as much as Ridge's as he groped for his phone. I'm going to dial 911. Ridge, wait. Hold on, please. Ridge, however, was not waiting. He was going down. Tumbling over layers of suffering. Taylor's deception regarding Steffi caused him to suffer from a deep, ongoing pain that was like a crack in his soul. This amputation was what this was. A crucial aspect of him, the aspect that had faith in Brooke, them, and the central story of his life, had been brutally cut out. In addition to being news, Eric's 3 statements were the final straw for Ridge and Brooke. Each time the statement was repeated, it sounded like a new stab in the empty chamber of his mind. Nick was her choice. Nick was her choice. Nick was selected by her. He was able to raise his head just enough to lock eyes with Eric, his eyes wide with a dread that went beyond physical pain. When his voice did come out, it was a broken, unidentifiable rasp, hardly able to be heard above his own wheezing, strained attempts at breathing. Married? The one word was stifled, incredulous, and weighed down by 1,000 broken hopes. She's marrying him? It was the sound of the final breaking of hope, not an inquiry asking for confirmation. All Eric could do was nod, tears welling up in his own eyes. Ridge, I sincerely apologize. I only recently learned. To tell me herself, Brooke called me. She stated that she requires steadiness. That Nick now comprehends her. Even Eric thought the words sounded ridiculous and hollow when he said them. Consistency? Nick Marone? Considering that Ridge had literally blown his last breath for her? It was an excuse that seemed completely untrue, a thin covering for an unfathomable betrayal. Stability. Ridge's head was in ruins when the word lit a spark. Had he offered her chaos? After fighting for her for decades? After almost losing your life for her? Nick offered, but what? Is it opportunistic? An opportunity to further twist the knife? White-hot, burning rage started to rise through the numbness and fight the oppressive hopelessness. Deep in his chest, it began as a low growl that echoed through his quivering body and was more animal than human. His knuckles were white, his hands were clenched, and his claws were driving so deeply into his palms that they could draw blood. The shaking grew more intense, but now it was driven as much by shock as by rage. She needs stability? Each syllable of the speech was oozing with bitter incredulity. After this? He made a feeble, unintelligible gesture towards his own battered body, which was a physical reminder of the sacrifice he had made. The sacrifice now seemed like the height of futility, a cruel universe's joke on him. For her, I stopped breathing. Pulling her out of that water killed me. Additionally, she rushes to Nick? Like poisonous garbage, the name was vomited out. The anger intensified, threatening to rupture the delicate vessels behind his eyes with a horrifying pressure. Does he comprehend her? Knows what? How can you control her? How can you intervene when she's at risk? How can one act as the anti-Ridge? The pressure caused his voice to rise and break, turning into a ragged cry that sounded across the patio and startled the neighboring trees' birds. What she does is this. She is like this. After everything. After decades. She never fails to. He was unable to complete. A wall of complete, soul-crushing fatigue was struck by the rage. What little breath he had left was taken away by the shouts. The tidal wave of anguish that followed the anger was too strong for it to withstand. It was too much to bear to see Brooke, his Brooke, promising Nick Marone her life, her future, and her love as he sat here, devastated and in shock. Almost as abruptly as it had blazed, the battle vanished from him. A deep, bone-deep shiver replaced the trembling. With his head lolling as his head sank back on the chair, he let out hot, angry, and helpless tears that finally made their way through the perspiration on his pale cheeks. Each sob that followed was a painful constriction of his wounded lungs, and they were silent, wrenching things that made his shoulders shake. Not to conceal the tears, but rather as a physical attempt to blot out the terrible truth Eric had presented, he covered his face with shaking hands. The 911 operator's tinny voice asked for their location while Eric watched, sad and powerless. His eyes never left his broken son as he reeled it off. They would send paramedics. The physical signs, such as shock, tachycardia, and respiratory distress, would be treated. He might even be stabilized by them. However, Eric Forrester was certain that no medication could heal the pain caused by those 3 words because he had seen the whole, tormented saga of Ridge and Brooke. Ridge Forrester had not only heard about Brooke's marriage, he had seen his life's central conviction brutally carried out. The man who had fought his own demons and the wrath of the ocean, who had triumphed over competing suitors, boardrooms, and fashion weeks, had been brought down by his father's straightforward reprimand rather than a physical strike. The cornerstone of his life, the conviction that Brooke Logan was his fate, was in ruins. And Eric heard the sound of something priceless and irreplaceable dying in the oppressive silence that was only broken by Ridge's raspy, tear-choked breaths. In the silence that followed, the 3 words reverberated, she picked Nick. The last cruel evidence that fate may cease breathing, just like the man wheezing in front of him.